Chapter 11 of A Songbird. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. A Songbird by Eleanora Hearn Stooke. Happy Days. It was a beautiful afternoon in May. The lilac and laburnum trees were in full bloom in the mill house garden, and fritillaries, snake's heads as some people call them, were plentiful in the meadows surrounding W, lifting their purple and white speckled heads above the buttercups and daisies in the fresh springing green grass. "I think they are such funny flowers," said Mavis, who, with Rose, had been for a walk by the towpath towards Oxford, along which they were now returning. She looked at the big bunch of fritillaries she had gathered as she spoke. "And though they are really like snakes' heads, I call them very pretty," she added. "Yes," agreed Rose. "Look, Mavis, there's Mr. Moseley in front of us. He's been sending Max into the water. I expect we shall catch up to him." "And then I shall be able to tell him my news," Mavis cried delightedly. "Oh, Rosie, I don't think I was ever so happy in my life before as I am today." A few minutes later the two little girls had overtaken the vicar, and, after they had exchanged greetings with him, Mavis told him her news, which she had only heard that morning, that her mother and Miss Dawson were returning to England and were expected to arrive before midsummer. "No wonder you look so radiant," he said kindly. Then, as Rose ran on ahead with Max, who was inciting her to throw something for him to fetch out of the river, he continued, "I remember so well the day I made your acquaintance, my dear. You were in sore trouble, and you told me you did not think you could be happy anywhere without your mother. Do you recollect that?" "Oh, yes," Mavis replied. "And you said if there were no partings there would be no happy meetings, and that we must trust those we love to our Father in heaven. And you asked me my name, and, when I had told it, you said I ought to be as happy as a bird. I felt much better after that talk with you, and I have been very happy at the mill house, much happier lately, too. I don't know how it is, but Aunt Lizzie and I get on much better now." "You have grown to understand each other?" suggested the vicar. "Yes, since her illness," Mavis replied. The vicar was silent. He had visited Mrs. John during her sickness and knew how very near she had been to death's door, and he thought very likely her experience of weakness and dependence upon others had softened her and taught her much which she had failed to learn during her years of health and strength. "Mother says Miss Dawson is quite well now," Mavis proceeded. "I am looking forward to meeting her again. I do wonder when that will be." She glanced at her companion as she spoke and saw he was looking grave and, she thought, a little sad. "Is anything amiss, Mr. Moseley?" she asked impulsively. "No, my dear," he replied. "I was merely thinking of two delicate young girls who are very dear to me. They died many years ago, but their lives might have been saved if they could have had a long sea voyage and a few months' sojourn in a warmer climate. However, that was not to be." "They did not go?" "No. Their father was a poor man, with no rich friends to help him, and so they died." "Oh, how very sad!" exclaimed Mavis, with quick comprehension. "A trip to Australia and back costs a lot of money, I know." "Oh, Mr. Moseley, how dreadful to see anyone die for want of money when some people have so much! How hard it must be! Didn't their poor father almost break his heart with grief? I should think he never could have been happy again." "You are wrong, my dear. He is an old man now, with few earthly ties, but he is happy. Wife and children are gone, but he knows they are safe with God, and he looks forward to meeting them again when his life's work is over." He changed the conversation then, but Mavis knew he had been speaking of himself, and that the young girls he had mentioned had been his own children, and her heart was too full of sympathy for words. Silently she walked along by his side till they overtook Rose. When Max created a diversion by coming close to her and shaking the water from his shaggy coat, thus treating her to an unexpected shower bath. "Oh, Max, you need not have done that!" cried Rose, laughing merrily, whilst the vicar admonished his favourite too. But Max was far too excited to heed reproof. He kept Rose employed in flicking sticks and stones for him to fetch, until the back entrance to the mill was reached, where the little girl said good-bye to the vicar and the dog followed his master home. The next few weeks dragged somewhat for Mavis, but she went about with a radiant light in her eyes and joy in her heart. Would her mother come to her immediately on landing? She wondered. Oh, she would come as soon as she possibly could, of that she was sure. I expect she wants me just as badly as I want her, she reflected, for we have been parted for 9 months, and that's a long, long time, though, of course, it might have been longer still. So the May days slipped by, and it was mid-June when, one afternoon, on returning from school, the little girls were met at the front door by Mrs. John, who looked at Mavis with the kindest of smiles on her face. "You have heard from Mother!" cried Mavis, before her aunt had time to speak. "Has the vessel arrived? Have you a telegram or a letter?" "Neither," Mrs. John answered, "but the vessel has arrived, and there's someone in the parlor waiting for you, Mavis. Go to her, my dear." Mavis needed no second bidding. She darted across the hall and rushed into the parlor, where, the next moment, she found herself in her mother's arms and clasped to her mother's breast. "Mother! Mother! At last! At last!" was all she could say. "Yes, at last, my darling," responded the dearly loved voice. Then they kissed each other again and again, and Mavis saw that her mother was looking remarkably well, and Mrs. Gray remarked that her little daughter had grown, and was the plumper and rosier for her sojourn in the country. It was a long while before Mavis could think of any one but themselves. But at last she inquired for Miss Dawson, and heard that her mother had left her in her own home in London that morning. "I expect she's glad to be back again, isn't she, Mother?" Mavis asked. "Very glad, dear. You can imagine the joyful meeting between her and her father. I shall never forget the thankfulness of his face when he saw how bright and well she was looking. Poor man, I believe he had made up his mind that he would never see her again. She does not require a nurse now, but I have promised to stay with her for a few months longer, and during that time, Mavis, I want you to remain at the mill house. Shall you mind?" "No," Mavis answered truthfully. "But you are not going right back to London, Mother, are you?" she asked, looking somewhat dismayed. "No, dear, I have arranged to stay a few days with you." What a happy few days those were to Mavis! She was allowed a holiday from school, and showed her mother her favourite walks, and spent a long afternoon with her in Oxford, where they visited T College, and the haunts her father had loved. And oh, how Mavis talked! There seemed to be no end to all she had to tell about the household at the mill house, and the vicar, and Richard Butt and his wife and baby, and kind Mrs. Long, to all of which her mother listened with the greatest interest and attention. "Why, how many friends you have made!" Mrs. Gray said, on one occasion when Mavis had been mentioning some of her schoolfellows. "You will be sorry to have to say good-bye to them, but I do not know when that will be, for I have not decided upon my future plans. I hope we shall never be parted for such a long time again." "Indeed, I hope not," Mavis answered fervently. "Shall we go back to live at Miss Tompkins'?" she inquired. "I don't know, dear," was the reply. "Perhaps we may, for a time." Everyone at the mill house was very sorry when Mrs. Gray left and returned to town. Her former visit had naturally been overshadowed by the prospect of separation from her little daughter, but this had indeed been a visit of unalloyed happiness, with no cloud of impending sorrow to mar its joy. After her mother's departure, Mavis went back to school with a very contented heart, and in another month came the summer holidays. Her feelings were very mixed when she learnt that it had been arranged for her to stay at W until the end of another term, for Mr. Dawson had earnestly requested Mrs. Gray to remain with his daughter till Christmas, and she had consented to do so, and she expressed her sentiments to her aunt in the following words: "I'm glad, and I'm sorry, Aunt Lizzie. Glad, because I can't bear the thought of saying good-bye to you all, and sorry, because I do want Mother so much sometimes. Still, London's quite near. It isn't as though Mother was at the other end of the world, and time passes so quickly. Christmas will soon be here." "I feel as though I must be dreaming," said Mavis, "but I suppose it's really, really true. I can hardly believe it." It was Christmas Eve, and a few days before, the little girl had been brought up to town by her uncle, who had delivered her to her mother's care. To her surprise, however, she had not been taken to Miss Tompkins's dingy lodging house, but to Mr. Dawson's house in Camden Square, where she had received a hearty welcome from Mr. Dawson and his daughter. She was with her mother and Miss Dawson now, in the pretty sitting room where, 15 months previously, she had made the latter's acquaintance. But there was nothing of the invalid about Miss Dawson today. She looked in good health and spirits, and laughed heartily at the sight of Mavis's bewildered countenance. "What is it you can hardly believe, eh?" asked Mr. Dawson as he entered the room. "I have been telling her that you mean to build and endow a convalescent home in the country for girls, as a thanks offering to God for my recovery, father," Miss Dawson said, answering for Mavis, "and that her mother is to be the matron, and she can scarcely credit it. Still, I think she approves of our plan." "Oh, yes, yes!" cried Mavis. "It's just what I would wish to do if I were you," she proceeded frankly, looking at Mr. Dawson with approval in her glance, and then turning her soft hazel eyes meaningly upon his daughter. "And you couldn't have a better matron than mother." "Mavis, my dear!" interrupted Mrs. Gray. "It's quite true," declared Miss Dawson. Then she went on to explain to Mavis that the home was to be within easy reach of London, and it was to be a home of rest for sick working girls, where they would have good nursing. "I think it's a beautiful plan," said Mavis earnestly. She realized that it meant permanent work for her mother, too, and turning to her she inquired, "Shall I be able to live with you, mother?" "Yes, dear, I hope so," Mrs. Gray answered, with a reassuring smile. "Oh, yes, of course," said Miss Dawson, and the little girl's heart beat with joy. She remained silent for a while after that, listening to the conversation of her elders, and meditating on what wonderful news this would be for them all at the Mill House. Then her mind travelled to Mr. Moseley, and her face grew grave as she thought of those two delicate girls so dear to him, who had faded and died. But it brightened as she reflected how nice it must be to be rich, like Mr. Dawson, to be able to help those not so well off as himself. She was aroused from her reverie by Miss Dawson, who asked her to sing a carol to them, and she willingly complied, singing the same she had sung at the village concert at W nearly a year before. Afterwards she gave them an account of the concert, and expressed the hope that she would be a great singer some day. "Why, Mavis, I never knew such an idea had entered your head!" exclaimed her mother, greatly surprised. "It never did, mother, until Mr. Moseley told me I had a great gift, and that God expected me to use it for the benefit of others," the little girl replied seriously. "Surely he was right," said Miss Dawson. And with that Mrs. Gray agreed. Later in the evening, when Mavis went to the window and peeped out to see what the weather was like, she felt an arm steal around her shoulders, and Miss Dawson asked, "What of the night? Are we going to have a fine Christmas?" "I believe we are," Mavis answered. "The sky is clear and the stars are very bright. Look!" Miss Dawson did so, pressing her face close to the window pane. Then she suddenly kissed Mavis and whispered, "God bless you, dear, for all you've done for me. I carried the remembrance of your sweet voice singing 'The Lord is only my support' to Australia and back again, and it cheered and strengthened me more than you will ever know. I wish you a happy Christmas, little songbird, and many, many more in the years to come." End of chapter 11, read by Nancy Cochran Gergen, Gilbert, Arizona, December 27, 2023. End of A Songbird by Eleanora H. Stooke.